So a brand new town on a greenfield site, development challenges and opportunities. Let me take you back to 1995. Okay, so 1995, the County Council published a discussion paper. Sorry, I just need to synchronise this. The County Council published a discussion paper which was essentially saying Plymouth and Exeter, the two biggest draws of the local economy, and therefore there should be two new towns, one which we now know as Sherford, and another which we now know as Cranbrook. And if you want to know about Cranbrook on a page, this is it essentially, okay? What the narrative essentially says is that Exeter's constrained. You've got the Holden Hill to one side, you've got the river, you've got floodplain. You've also got a lot of area of outstanding natural beauty in East Devon, and few settlements that were willing to expand to take the implications of Exeter's growth. So fundamentally, you needed to have a new community in the Exeter area to provide for Exeter's growth. The key part of it is there, which is the planning expectations that the County Council imposed with regard to it, essentially saying that we need to minimise the impact on the landscape, minimise the take on agricultural land, minimise the impact on existing settlements, be well related to infrastructure, and ensure that it didn't impact upon Exeter's growing prosperity. And I think for me, one of the key points was, that's it. Then it was splat. East Devon, here's your opportunity, make the most of it. And I think, in terms of looking back, and it's always easier to say stuff with hindsight, isn't it? Looking back, and my background was in the private sector as a planning lawyer, no regard to the financial realities, no regard to the legal implications of how this would actually happen. After the Second World War, you had new town development corporations. During the 80s, you had urban development corporations, but you had vehicles that the state supported which were designed to try and ensure that things happened perhaps in a better planned way. But what you have here, if you like, is the role of the state subjugated to that of the private sector and the implications that we then had to work through. And what you then found was that essentially word for word, we replicated what the structure plan said, albeit the numbers were steadily increasing from an initial 2,100, 3,000 is mentioned here, and we go up and we go up as the years go by. That's my version of the timeline, if you like, and I think the key point is to draw you to 2007, which was the growth point designation. So between 2000, when I joined the council, I see Sarah's in the audience and she'll remember this, my first job when I joined the council was to the QC's opinion to try and stop Cranbrook happening. Clearly I failed, but it didn't hold me back, okay? So, and also anecdotally, my memory says we had something like 12,000 objections in our local plan to Cranbrook. Andy Wood, who's also here, says, no, Mark, you're getting old, is at least 18,000. But there were a substantial number of objections that we had to work through from local people who didn't want to see this happen. But again, just bringing you there to 2007, the growth point designation. That was the first opportunity we got to try and explain to the government that we actually needed help with regard to this. You couldn't expect the private sector to do it off their own back. There were real considerations, not just cash flow, but how would you afford all the infrastructure that was required. And it was the first opportunity we had to convince the government that actually we needed help, and if we didn't have that help, nothing would happen. The growth point designation was therefore key to that. And you can see then in 2010 we managed to grant planning permission and outline planning permission, reserved matters in 2011, and indeed in 2012, as we've already heard, people started to move in. For us then, the vision that we developed both in the local plan and through iterations of what we were trying to achieve in Cranbrook is summed up in the vision. Three key words there. People will have their own opinions about how successful we've been to date, but sustainable, vibrant, and attractive. And then the rest of the narrative there talks about a nod to what we know and understand about Devon, if you like, but also, actually, this is a new town. It has to think forward to the 21st century. And that was important too, because it gave us the ability to think through how do we get support from other agencies. So the Healthy New Town, getting the NHS interested in the new community, and also, as you'll hear later, I think, Sport England as well, getting them interested in the new community to, again, help us with this idea that it should be sustainable, vibrant and attractive. So in terms of understanding what's actually happened, this was it in May 2011. Nothing, a farm, some green fields, none of which had great agricultural value or ecological value, I was assured. And then within the space of 2 years, you already start to see quite a lot happening in phase one. So something that was key, which Tanya will talk about later, I'm sure, is the primary school. So the decision of the County Council to close the old Clisthonnerton Primary School and relocate the primary school to phase one of Cranbrook, and also in particular ensure that the school was there and open before anyone had actually moved into Cranbrook, was a key important part and a good thing in terms of creating a community feel for the place. Other elements which are also important, which you can see, that's where the railway station is now, and you can see the construction with regard to that. You also have the country park in its sort of infancy there. Obviously, slightly contentious because fundamentally that is part of the floodplain, but designed to fulfill that purpose, but also fulfill the purpose of a country park. And then also here you start to see what was Young Hayes and the shops that were being constructed at the same time, or as near as possible soon after, as the primary school to try and make sure that there was something there for people to appreciate and enjoy. By August 2015, phase one was substantially completed and built out, and you can see it there. And then what we now have, and I've put this slide up deliberately just to give you an indication of some of the public money that we've had to get into make Cranbrook work. But up here now you can see phase two of Cranbrook as it's building out eastwards, and you have the secondary school or the main community education campus there, and you can see that the housing in other places is starting to work its way up there towards Wimpole, as it were. And here is an area which is currently our biggest headache, if you like, which is what's meant to be the town centre, and how do we actually try and ensure that we get shopping and suitable facilities for a town centre for Cranbrook. But just looking at that, that's over £50 million of money that we've had to find or beg, borrow, steal, cajole government and other bodies to invest in the town. It also doesn't include other things like the cost of doing the Junction 29, the cost of doing the Clisthonnerton bypass. But you start to see here, the £4 million for the district heating network, the amount of affordable housing that went into phase one particularly, £16 million, Growth Point money to build Young Hayes, for example, and then other things that sort of go into the other facilities that have been provided. So, a massive task and a long task, and if you like, what do we think are the learning points from it? So these are the ones that I thought I'd leave with you to try and mull over as you sort of consider what other speakers have got to say. But the first one for me is this, embrace the change. Devon's a lovely place. I love it to bits. I've no intention of leaving, but it doesn't necessarily take to change very well. A lot of the people who move down here, it's their little bit of England. They want to pull up the drawbridge. But there is something about embracing the change. It is going to happen. It's going to happen in your own lives. It's going to happen in corporate life and in social life. And there's something about perhaps, my own council, other parties involved in Cranbrook, actually sitting back, way over 10 years ago now, almost 20 years ago, and saying, guys, this is going to happen. Actually, could we make a better job of it, by actually sort of embracing the change right at the start? It's the modern world, isn't it? But lobbying and also partnership, is a key skill that we all have to have, particularly in the public sector. And it's something, if you like, that we need to get better at, and you can never be best at, if you like. This, for me, is the other one, and this is a lesson that we're trying to work through in terms of other iterations of development that will happen in Devon and also in East Devon in the years to come. But control of land, does land have a social purpose, or is land just there for profit? Because the role of the state in terms of does land have a social purpose as opposed to the role of the private sector, is land there for profit, as a key issue in terms of what you can design, what you can achieve in terms of a new community. One thing I think we were right to do, and one thing that has really benefited the town, I'm sure, is our infrastructure-led approach, which is to make sure that all the parties with an interest, so the county council, the education authority, others, electricity providers and others, the infrastructure needs to be there in the first place, because people who are going to live in new towns won't have confidence if it is just a green field with a few roads and houses but nothing else to appeal to them. They're not going to invest their own money in living in a place. Partnership working, Virginia mentioned that right at the start, but it's a key skill and one, to say, that has to be worked at. And lastly, this, I think, isn't it? Keep going, be determined, be flexible, and forever be optimistic, because there's plenty of people who aren't. So if you're not optimistic, they will grind you down. There we go. Okay.